Welcome to Paul Champlina's Talking Property channel.
Hello, it's Paul Champlina. This week we are talking about all the things that are in the news relating to landlording, being a tenant and a letting agent. The renters' rights update. We've been living and breathing it for 6 years. Today I have a special guest, someone who's esteemed, who knows his onions. It's Sean Hooker, Head of Property Redress.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really pleased. We are co-workers at Hamilton Fraser.
We are indeed.
So we own lots of different brands within the group. We own My Deposits, Property Redress, which you're heading up, Client Money Protect, Landlord Action, Landlord Zone, Total Landlord Insurance, HF Assist. Everything and everything. We act for the best part of maybe 500,000 landlords and about 23,000 letting agents, something like that.
Yeah.
So Sean, just before we get into the guts of the renters' rights, because I want honest answers about how you feel about
100%.
this, because you are sitting with government all the time, right? And we're talking and breathing this non-stop. Just give us a little bit of background. You've been in the organisation of Hamilton Fraser for many, many, many years. You were here at the birth of My Deposits in 2007 and started the Property Redress scheme, which is now rebranded as Property Redress. Just quickly tell us about that journey quickly.
Very quickly. Well, I started in 2007. Came in to start and set up the adjudication service, the dispute resolution service for My Deposits, which we started from scratch. Didn't have a template for this because this was brand new legislation. We went through that, we set that up, we managed to develop that scheme. It's now really successful. I then moved on to running the Property Redress, which was then called the Property Redress Scheme. Literally, it was another brand new thing for us. We set it up. They were already the Property Ombudsman in
That was
place.
2014, wasn't it?
That was 2014. We started literally with no customers, but the legislation made it mandatory for all letting agents and property managers to join a redress scheme. And within the first year, we're 5,000. We're now up to 23,000.
23,000?
23,000.
Wow.
And look, what we do is we deal with complaints, so we can talk about that a bit later.
And that's landlords, sellers, buyers, tenants complaining about members, basically?
Correct, yes. Correct.
Right, okay. And that doesn't just cover lettings and management, covers sales, auctions, property education, sourcing.
And long-term leases.
Long-term leases.
Yeah,
and it's about
absolutely.
raising standards and making sure that the customer's got somewhere to complain.
Yeah, 100%.
Fine. So, and that actually, and obviously we're going to talk about now the Renters' Rights Bill, which is going to be an act by the end of the year. Why don't you just update all the viewers as to where are we at now legislation-wise?
Legislation-wise, we are in what's called the committee stage of the House of Lords. So literally, it's gone through the House of Commons and a draft bill has been sent to the House of Lords. They are now considering amendments. And they're on day 4 now of considering those amendments. And there are about almost 200 of them being put in. Some of them are literally changing the odd word, but others are more fundamental and trying to change big chunks of the legislation. Now, if it's put forward by a non-governmental lord, so that would be from an opposition party or a crossbencher, there's less likelihood that would succeed because the government isn't going to back it.
And the government have majority in the House of Parliament?
They've got a majority, yes. So overall in the House of Lords, technically there is not a majority for the government, but if it goes through and the government still don't agree with what the House of Lords do, they can keep pushing until they get what they want.
So, let's be honest, how does it look for landlords?
Actually, look, for landlords, it's going to be challenging. And I'm going to say challenging because every individual landlord is different. For some, it's going to be like Armageddon. It's going to be the end of the world. And maybe those landlords hadn't really been doing the right things in the first place. But for those that have been doing and running strong businesses and strong compliance with the law, it's just another set of compliance they've got to get their heads around.
And landlords have loads of compliance, don't they?
They do have lots of compliance, but given how important the sector is, you're housing people, you're providing
It's a
homes
profession
to
now,
it's
isn't it?
It's a profession. And, you know,
business.
houses can be very dangerous places if they're not kept up to standard. So that's one of the things why I think overall we should be embracing the sentiment behind it, but there's going to be technical bits that you're going to have to get your heads around. So, they're going to be challenging.
So look, we're all veterans in this. We've seen this. I was heavily involved in the Deregulation Act, and you've been involved with loads of different legislation that's come in. Look, the big worry is, and I've said it on numerous media outlets, the big worry is the banning of Section 21. periodic tenancies, the strengthening of the grounds of Section 8, and the lack of investment in the court system. Is that are they the main worries for landlords and agents?
I think that's preliminary. The first thing that's going to hit them, because that, I think, is going to come in quicker than most of the other stuff that's in.
You can't bring it all in.
You can't bring it all in at the same time. So this day one, changing the type of tenancy, day one almost that you can't have a no-fault eviction, are going to be the clear and present danger for most landlords, especially if you have a property that you're currently having a few problems with. And so there's now a little bit of a rush now to what are you actually going to try and do with that. Have you got enough time to get a bad tenant out before the legislation starts? And you guys at Landlord
and Landlord Action, we see that firsthand. Landlords are excellent. I said this 100%. I said this 5-6 years ago, which I did worry about, the landlord tsunami of exit, which are the smaller landlords, dare I say it, or landlords that are looking at their portfolio and taking a business case view. Antisocial behaviour is a big issue as well, isn't it? So you are a redress scheme for agents, okay? So what's the word on the street? What are agents worried about, Sean?
Well, agents. I've met a lot of agents. They may not agree with things, but as long as everything is clear and they can follow a process, they can usually adapt. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is the transition period. How will they be given enough time to get their heads around the new legislation and to make sure that their processes are in place?
Well, that's agents. What about landlords that are self-managing?
Well, exactly the same. It does apply. If you're not using an agent, then de facto you are the head of your lettings company, to be fair, whether it's, forget about incorporation, but you are where the buck stops. You are the person that ultimately is responsible. If you employ an agent, yes, you are ultimately responsible, but you've got to be somebody either watching your back or that you can hold accountable to. So everybody has got to be up to speed on this, and it's the period of time it's going to take to do that I think is going to be a concern. And
do we think 3 or 6 months?
How long's a piece of string? Right. At the moment, the government said a reasonable time. Now, what a reasonable time means, we don't know. It hasn't been defined.
Fine. So your gut reaction from on the ground, speaking to government, head of one of the major schemes that are out there, when do you think the legislation is going to be enacted? Is it going to be by the end of the year with a transition, or including the transition by the end of the year? I'm putting you on the spot now.
You're putting me on the spot on that one.
Next April 2026.
I don't think they're going to get away with that. And for two reasons. Number one, we see the rhetoric that's coming from the campaigning side of the tenants' campaigning side.
And do you think that on that point? Sorry to interrupt you. Do you think, and you just ignited, are the tenant groups better at campaigning than the landlord groups?
They appear to be, don't they?
Right. Yeah.
They have the narrative. They have the story. Right. And politics works on stories.
Right. Good point.
Some of them you might say are fiction, but yes, it works on stories. And if the narrative coming from the tenant side is a stronger draw or appeal, politicians react to that. Nobody is sympathetic to a landlord's case, if they've got a yacht in New York.
No, of course. But there's always this perception that all landlords have got loads of money, which is not the case.
Which is not the case.
Of course it's not the case.
But that's not the narrative that is the strong one. What is the narrative that's the strong one is somebody with 3 children who can barely afford to feed those children.
Yeah. And affordability is a massive issue for tenants. It's the hardest time ever to be a tenant, and now in 2025. I think we all have to accept that. So I'm going to give you some quick fire questions.
Yeah, okay.
All right? And you're going to give me some answers about your gut feeling of what needs to happen. So, student landlords. Okay, we look at the amendments and the grounds and the tenancies. What's your gut feeling? What's going to happen?
Gut reaction is the legislation is going to stay as it is at the moment, which means that there is going to be a ground for you to get rid of a student at the end of their academic year. Longer term, I think there's going to be have to be a scrutiny on the sector, because you have got specialist student landlords who are pretty much acting like that's all they do. But you have got the grey area landlords where you might have 3 students in there, but then a chap who's working might come in, and so he's then not a student. legislating for that and regulating that is going to be a bigger challenge.
Right.
But I think if you can kind of say that if you are a specialist landlord, there should be a set of rules and regulations you can follow, and hopefully that the government would bear that in mind and not just put it onto the big institutions, but allow a smaller landlord to qualify.
I think it's quite clear there's big institutional investors coming in. We're seeing that Hamilton Fraser with big clients are buying more and more stock now, which maybe the argument is the government prefer that. It appears most probably they do.
Because they can control that better.
Because they can control when they've got the funds and they can be more professional. I get all that. Let's look at quickly, I'm not going to go through the grounds, right? The grounds of Section 8, you know. They're moving up from 2 months rent arrears to 3 months rent arrears, 14 days to 28 days. That's too much, isn't it, for a landlord?
Well, the argument that's given for that is that it gives a period of time to try and help resolve the issue.
You mean mediate?
Well, mediate or to negotiate or whatever. But again, that's not always going to work for a situation where you've got a persistent tenant that is...
Or a tenant that won't move has got nowhere else to go.
No, 100%.
And they've got to go through the courts.
Yes. So I don't think that a landlord just have to pay for somebody to find a new property. I mean, there's some suggestions that have been come from the tenant groups that that's going to be the case. But I think there has to be now earlier intervention by the landlord to deal with themselves before it gets to court.
I agree with that, and self-management is an issue, and we're going to come on to landlord redress very shortly and how that's going to work. But isn't the norm now, and this is for someone that's been living and breathing this for over 30 years and knows the court system pretty well, isn't the norm in the new world going to be that, bearing in mind we've got a failing court system that's had a lack of investment, a bailiff system that's as worse as ever be, isn't the new norm now going to be landlords going to be owed 1 year's rent arrears? That's going to be the new norm, isn't it?
It may work out that way. I don't know. You've worked in landlord action long enough to know how quickly it takes. It can take to.
We're waiting 50. We've been waiting 15 months for one eviction date at Clerkenwell Council. It's horrendous.
I think the thing you've got to bear in mind, number two, is who is this good for? Is it good for the tenant, or is it good for the landlord, or is it good for neither? My gut reaction between you and I is that why would you willingly or willfully encourage somebody to get themselves further and further into a debt cycle? So if you are a tenant and you are in arrears, you evidently are suffering some form of affordability issues. What they are, we don't know. Most tenants are not just going to willingly.
No, that, and obviously there's credit rating. Only if a landlord enforces it is a credit rating issue.
However, why would a system encourage a tenant to build up further debt? Because they're never going to get out of that cycle. That's why the early intervention is so important, in my view. I understand the government saying let's not just a tenant may be able to recover their position, but I don't see any evidence of that yet.
Fine. So this comes on to my next link. So we're going to run through some of the headliners of some of the rules and regulations that they're planning to bring in under the Renters' Rights Bill. So we've talked about 4 of them already. And obviously, 1 month periodic tenancies rather than a fixed term. You have to have a ground. The non-fault Section 21 is going. But there was always a fault. There was always a reason. Most of the time now is landlord selling. Landlord redress, landlord database. Explain what it is, Sean.
Landlord redress, right. So a database is basically a register. It's going to be a register of the property. That property will be registered on this database. It will by the landlord or their agent.
And if you fail to do so, you'll get a fine.
Correct. And it's got to meet some minimum standards. So it's about putting a property that is fit to rent onto this database, and then you are allowed to rent it out.
Right, so that's that.
That's the simple bit, yeah.
Landlord redress, what is it going to be, and how does it affect landlords?
So how does it affect landlords? So you have a complaint, your tenant complains to you, they ring you up and say, I've got an issue with the property, and you fail to deal with that, and you persistently fail to deal with that.
Ignoring it as a landlord.
They have somebody they can ring up that you have had to join by law. So you have to sign up for this organisation. You have to give the details of this organisation to your tenant.
Right.
The tenant then has a contact with these people, and they can raise a complaint. It will go to that organisation, who will try and resolve that dispute, either by trying to get you to do it together or telling you that's what you're going to do.
Fine. So we've been in this game a long time. You have put 2.74 million landlords, right? There's a lot of landlords out there that don't see themselves as landlords. So trying to get them, you know what it's like setting schemes up. You set up my deposits and you set up the property redress scheme. Now we're asking landlords to register.
Yes.
Will they register? How long will it take them to register? There's going to be an issue about trying to get people that sign up for this. But what is going to be the biggest complaint? Presumably it's going to be disrepairs, and can I'm being a bit cynical here, can tenants try it on to try and get out and not paying the rent?
Well, they could do that at the moment, so nothing will change on that particularly. So to be fair, it's going to be a whole gamut of complaints from the start of the tenancy. For example, part of the legislation is going to be looking at discrimination and other stuff there. There's going to be pets involved in legislation that's going to be interpreted. There's deposits, there's holding deposits, and then when you're into the tenancy, it is I've rung up and the boiler doesn't work. There's
the landlord's ignored me,
and the landlord's ignored me, or they haven't done this and they haven't done that. Now the reality of that is some of those will be fundamental issues to living, but others will be lifestyle and enjoyment of the property issues. So, for example, I've dealt with complaints where the letterboxes, the external letterboxes, have been vandalised, and the landlord hasn't repaired them. So I'm not getting my post. Now that's not going to excite the local authority from a health and safety point of view.
Yeah, but they won't have the resource to deal with those really major complaints, because it's going to accelerate, isn't it? With regard to resource.
Yeah.
The government have said they're going to put more resource in, haven't they?
Yes, they say they're going to put more resource in, but it's like everything else. Where are their priorities going to lie? So, what is the priority? The priority will be actually health and safety in the property. Fine. So, we are talking about the things that excite them the most, the campaigners the most, are things like damp and mould.
Yes, of course. And then obviously we can talk about Awab's law. Yeah, explain what Awab's law going to be.
So, that's going to be that at the moment, you have to keep your property in a decent state. But what's happened in the past is that things like damp and mould, landlords have tended to turn around and say, "Oh, it's nothing to do with us; it's to do with their lifestyle. They're drying washing in the living room. They're not ventilating."
Of course, this poor little boy died.
And this poor boy died
in a social housing property, not a private rental sector
absolutely.
property.
But what they're saying now, what law is going to do, is going to put the onus back on the landlord to be proactive.
Yes.
And to try and help prevent that, either through help, advice, or sometimes structurally to go and have a look at the property. A lot of condensation is caused by structural.
Yes, of course.
Structural defects, and then compounded by a tenant doing a lifestyle. So it's a combination of stuff.
There's a really good website called indooraware.co.uk, which actually there's a lot of education for landlords and tenants about condensation. There's some really good gadgets out there that measure the temperature, and I think in this day and age of a poor little 6-year-old, I think he was, dying 3 or 4 years ago is just shocking. It's quite right that should be legislation. A landlord has a responsibility.
They do, but as I say, it is codes and setting that out, useful stuff that can really make a difference. And early intervention is essential, because mould and damp and mould, to get to the state it did for poor little Awab, the neglect on that. On that must have been extreme, in my view.
And what about this property portal? What's a property portal?
Well, again,
is it going to be a property where miraculously you have all the data at the end of our fingertips? I mean, we know what it's like building computer systems, but government building computer systems. So you put an address in, and then you'll see whether the property is fully compliant. Is that what the government are trying to do?
That would be the dream, wouldn't it? The dream would actually have something where you are managing the property. Everything is there. Your compliance is put together. Your repair schedules and everything else. Look, I know out there's lots of commercial companies that are currently working on products like this. Whether the government's one is going to look like that. Remember, the government's resources are a lot less
yes, of course.
than the commercial side.
Yeah.
I would say that this is an opportunity now for the industry to come and say, look, we have been looking at solutions ourselves. And, you know, and things like the National Residential Landlord themselves, you know, they will say, you know, they've got their systems that are going.
Well, I mean,
there are others out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I would say to anyone watching, joining the National Residential Landlord Association is a no-brainer. £100 a year for all the support that you get, the advice on the templates and all that type of stuff. So we're coming to the end. With again to the Renters' Rights Bill, it is the biggest change in 30 years. Landlords are used to change. They're used to being adaptable. They're not going to get any rosettes or medals for the work they carried out. So I've got 3 more questions for you, and it relates to landlords, tenants, and agents. Okay, what are your advice? Bearing in mind you're close and upfront with it, and you know we are serving all these landlords, all these tenants, all these letting agents. Well, I mean, obviously they have to keep calm. Everyone has to keep calm and understand the detail, and that's going to take time. Firstly, what's your advice to landlords entering the biggest phase in the private rental sector?
Don't panic. Do your homework. And make sure that you keep meticulous records, that you have an absolute audit trail for everything that you do.
Fine. And letting agents, well, and as you know, I do lots of training to letting agents, especially on attracting landlords to your business and growing your lettings book. What advice do you give to letting agents, which have had an unbelievable amount of change?
Okay, you need to up your game, a lot of you. You need to make sure that you tell your landlords all the things that you are doing. Document that out and make sure that
showing your value.
Yeah, showing your value. Okay, and be proactive.
And also showing your landlord you care.
And you care.
I think that's really important.
And I think that proactive being.
Yeah, and I think it's keeping your landlord, preventing your landlord from selling, is a key objective, because selling a property is a last resort, but I see landlords that are selling because, of course, let's face it, landlords, I think, should be incentivised to stay in the market, you know, have some sort of tax. You know, we have the Section 24 that come in, the higher interest rates. So, and also some landlords just don't want to be a landlord, but really letting agents, there's a great opportunity there to pick up full management, because you have a lot of landlords that are retiring as well, haven't you? And what advice do you have to tenants, who are the customers at the end of the day? You know, what advice should you be giving them?
Okay, so know your rights. When you are entering into into this agreement, remember, use your brain as well as your heart. You are literally kind of choosing your next home. That's an emotional thing, but you need to know your rights, and you need to apply your brain as well to know what your rights are, what your obligations are, and make sure that you know where to go when you need help, and get that help as early as possible. Don't try and do it yourself. Stop paying the rent because you're unhappy.
You're in breach of contract if you do that.
Make sure that you get the advice, help and advice. There's loads of people out there. Both the industry provides that, and there's a lot of charity organisations out there.
Yeah.
It's free. There's information you don't have to pay for.
Yes, of course.
It's all there. It's all available. It's all free.
And I think with regard to tenants, yes, they're paying more rent than ever before. I think the market's leveled off a bit. I did a talk last week for Property Mark, and they said the rents are coming down in some areas. That I think with regard to a tenant is driven by the property, not by the landlord. 100%. I would say do some research on your landlord. Find out what's their long-term objective. Are they a professional landlord? You know, I think that's really, really important, because like, at the end of the day, a landlord wants a tenant to stay in as long as possible. The agent is doing a very vital job to sustain that tenancy. I think tenants prefer dealing with agents. They stay longer if it's a fully managed property. So, any last words from Sean Hooker, Property Redress, relating to renters' rights?
This will, if we work together, could be very beneficial for the sector. There's going to be short-term pain. I think that a lot of landlords are not going to adapt. But I think if you find the right people to help and advise,
you need a power team. We
are here to help you. There's a lot of information out there. I speak to landlords all the time, and they say, if I knew this before, I wouldn't have made those mistakes. And I get frustrated because we do lots of, across all the platforms, we do all this promotion across a lot of platforms, and it's available there. You only have to know to look for it.
I know exactly.
Be greedy for education and information.
And on that point, because of what you've just said, I'm doing an event on the 4th of June, Landlord Survivor Guide 2025 in Euston with the Landlord Investment guys, Tracy and Steve, which is a no-nonsense CPD accredited event. Property education doesn't actually have to cost you a lot of money.
No.
You don't have to spend fortunes to go on all these courses. Lots of it is free.
It's the biggest investment you can make. It saves you so much money.
Well,
in the
it
long
can.
run,
I think you have to. We are now in the phase of 2025. It's the days of being a professional landlord. Even if you're not self-managing yourself, it is a profession now. Even if you've got 1 or 2 properties, treat it as a business. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to hear your thoughts. Post them in the comments section below.
Subscribe now to Talking Property.